So turn 10 is in the books, and conflict still raging around the globe. Germany continues to build up their strength for a possible showdown here with the Soviet Union. So Germany went into Bulgaria, activated that country, and they went into this northern Greece territory. So they've now declared war on the Greeks and taken that territory. So that was those two territories combined worth a couple of bucks for Germany. So not a huge income increase, but a little bit of money. And then they again continue to spend their money on ground units. They bought a bunch of motorized infantry. They are still motorized at this point. They haven't even advanced to stage 1 of mechanized infantry yet. And they also built some more medium armor. So if we take a look here in Germany itself, they're absolutely loaded with ground units. So in East Germany itself, that's a stack of about 15 medium armor, 5 motorized infantry, 5 towed artillery, and 5 self-propelled artillery. They also have 5 more medium armor in Berlin and some more towed artillery and motorized infantry in the southern territories south of Germany there. Plus, obviously, they're scooping up the countries here in the Balkans and getting all of those units as well for the Germans. They also went ahead, moved a bunch more infantry into West Germany. Not that the British are even close to an invasion, but just building up some defenses in the West in case the Allies decide to come over down the road. Also, the Germans put a fortification down over here in West Germany. Now, the thing with that was in the rules, it said in January 1941 that the Germans put a fortification down on the German border. So that was a unit that got added. I wasn't sure. It didn't, again, unless I missed something, it didn't specify what actual German territory and what German border. So right now, the only conflict they have is in the West, really, at least for the Allies. So I put it down in West Germany. I don't know if maybe it should have went in Bavaria. I'm assuming the fortification is representing the West Wall that the Germans erected during the Second World War. So I think that was more opposite the Maginot Line, which in turn would mean it would go in Bavaria, but I wasn't really sure. So if you guys know if that fortification has to go down in a specific territory, like I said, I put it in Western Germany for now, but if it has to go in Bavaria instead, I'll move that. So that was basically it for the Germans. Again, they're just building up a huge amount of ground units. They haven't bought an aircraft or a naval unit in several turns. They also landed the planes that took part in the battle for that northern Greek territory here in Yugoslavia. So I'm thinking that the Germans actually might take those planes after they push further into Greece on this turn and land them in North Africa to help beef up the Italian defenses there. As far as the Russians go, they also just kind of stayed put. As you can see, they got a pretty decent wall of units defending on the border. Now, none of them are anything great in terms of the units. They're all infantry, but that's what the Russians want. They don't want to leave valuable units on the border with Germany, inviting target for the Germans to launch once they attack the Soviet Union. So they built another 5 medium armor T-34s. So they're sitting in Arel-Kursk. So the Russians have a pretty good counterattack force waiting on the Germans should they come. It's not going to happen this turn, this July 41 turn coming up, just because the Germans really don't have units right at the border with Russia, except for a couple down here in this southern Polish territory or former Polish territory. That's not going to cut it. So I'm assuming that most of these German units here in Berlin and East Germany are going to move out this next turn, move up a couple of spaces, because that was one of the reasons why the Germans bought the motorized infantry, not only as cannon fodder, but also they can tow these 5 artillery pieces that aren't motorized themselves. So all that will be able to move 2 spaces here this next turn, and that'll put them right on the border with all the Russian territory. So I'm assuming that the January 42 turn will see conflict between Germany and Russia. So that was it for the Germans and the British, or excuse me, the Germans and the Russians. So then as far as the British go, we had some interesting developments there. So this naval force that was here in Sea Zone 48, which had 4 men on the transports, came down and landed in southern Algeria. So that took a buck away from the Germans, bumped the British up 1, so that was good for them. And then they obviously had the 2 navies here combined into one large fleet. So they're looking at a battleship, a light carrier, 3 destroyers, 2 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and the 2 transports with the 4 men. So the British were sitting pretty good there. They had then flown the Air Force that landed on the Gold Coast. They flew that down here to South Africa. They also had purchased another tactical and a medium bomber, or a medium tank, that they put in South Africa. So altogether in South Africa, they got 2 medium tanks, 2 fighters, 2 tacticals, a medium bomber, and a strategic bomber. So some pretty good offensive punch for the British to start making their way back up Africa. And that's where things stood for the British. The negative was they were down to just $22 when they collected their income. So they're kind of hurting for money here. They really need the U.S. to get into the conflict, or have the Germans open up on the Russians so they can maybe form an alliance with them. Because really right now, it's just Britain standing alone. And the Germans aren't applying any pressure on Britain. But the Germans, with bonuses, nearly triple what the income the British are bringing in. So that's just allowing the Germans to build up so many forces in Europe that it's going to be extremely difficult for the British to land back on the continent. And then in the meantime, with bonuses, Italy is just about even with the British. So the British have got their hands full just trying to deal with Italy in Africa, let alone worrying about the Germans at this point. So they really need the U.S. or the Russians to come on over and lend a hand. As far as the U.S., they actually didn't spend any money over in the Atlantic this turn. So everything's just kind of sitting put where it is, waiting to be able to maneuver, whether it's this fleet moving into the Pacific or these units off the east coast of the United States ready to come over into the conflict in Europe or Africa. So then the interesting part, again, this turn was with the Italians. So Italy went ahead and bought 2 fighters and 2 infantry. They maneuvered some stuff around. They brought an infantry and a cavalry back up here to East Egypt, moved some guys over. The guy in Iraq moved over 1 to Transjordan. The guy in Transjordan moved over to East Egypt. And then what we were looking at is the Italians. In northern Italy, they had their Air Force, their entire Air Force, 4 fighters and 4 tacticals. So with the British sitting here in southern Algeria, with the 4 men, the 2 transports able to move them anywhere they want in the Med this next turn, along with a sizable fleet to provide shore bombardment, the Italians had to do something with these 4 men. So if the Italians would have brought their Air Force down into Africa to defend against the British landing there, they probably would have been successful in repelling the British invasion, because the British, other than the shore bombardments and infantry, only had 1 fighter. But then that leaves northern Italy and Rome pretty much defenseless. Rome's got, I think, 4 or 5 infantry, and northern Italy had an infantry and a mountain infantry. So the Italians didn't want to bring the planes from Italy. that would have left them pretty much defenseless. The British would have been able to land with 4 infantry in either one of these territories, along with all those shore bombardments. So you're talking about possibly and probably losing Rome. So then the capital's gone and you lose all that money to the British. Or if the British would have went for northern Italy instead, now you're talking about losing both your factories. They're now degraded down to minor factories. And then even if you take that territory back the next turn, now you got to spend all that money to build those factories back up. So they didn't want to leave Italy. But then on the other hand, they also didn't want to leave Africa pretty much defenseless. Without the planes down here, there was a single man in Tripolitania that they just bought, and then 2 men in a motorized in Cyrenaica. So either one of those would have fell to the British invasion as well. So they risked it and brought all 8 planes down and attacked southern Algeria with the 4 infantry there. And luckily for Italy, they went ahead and got 4 hits on round 1, and the British only got 1 hit in return. So the Italians lost a single fighter. And now that those 4 British infantry are wiped out, there's no ground units left along with this fleet to land anywhere. So now the Italians have prevented the British. They don't have to worry about a landing in Italy or in North Africa anytime soon. So that was huge on the Italians' part. And now the British are kind of back to square one. Probably have to send these transports back to England to pick up some stuff. They still have this force down here in South Africa, but that's got to slowly make its way up. Several turns at least, probably about 3 before they're in a position to attack East Egypt. And by then, that's 3 turns worth of the Italians placing units down in these 2 minor complexes. So a minor, smaller battle in the large context of the war, but actually, considering the position Britain's in, pretty significant. I think the Italians are going to be able to hold on longer now. Now that could obviously change once the U.S. gets into it, especially if the U.S. makes Africa a priority. But then that's taking the U.S. away from other issues that are going on around the globe. In the Pacific, Japan finished off the last of the Money Islands. They took Java, and they pulled back again a little bit further in northern China. They pulled back to Peking. They did take one communist-held Chinese territory that had a single communist Chinese cavalry. And that was about it for Japan. They put down 3 new destroyers here in Japanese home water. And they also went ahead, because they now have heavy battleship technology, they went ahead and put down 3 Yamato class battleships. So that bumped up the U.S. income by $3, $1 per battleship. But once those get on the board, it takes 3 hits to destroy, increased attack and defense. So some serious naval firepower for the Japanese that'll enter the game here in 2 more turns. They'll move them along to step 2, and then finally on the place units box 2 turns from now. Besides that, just maneuvered some stuff around. This small fleet came over here. Now with a transport, they can pick up this motorized infantry, possibly land in the Solomon Islands, or not that it's worth any money, but there's a bonus involved for the Japanese. So that was it for Japan. As far as the Far East Command, they moved up 1 spot with 4 infantry and 2 medium armor. They're trying to get in a position to possibly come into Siam to expel the Japanese from Southeast Asia here. Not sure that they're going to get there before Japan can back things up. They didn't want to leave Calcutta completely defenseless. They put 3 new infantry down there, and they still have their 2 fighters and their tactical. In Siam itself, there's 3 Japanese infantry and 3 fighters. But again, the Japanese have some units on transports and carriers with planes that they can maneuver around here to continue to back up Siam. Plus, the good thing about destroyers for Japan, besides the obvious naval benefit in terms of ship-to-ship combat. They also are able to transport one infantry class unit on their destroyers. So kind of a dual destroyer transport mode for Japanese destroyers in the game. Anzac kind of just turtled up into Sydney, saved their money. The U.S. actually spent money in the Pacific this turn, so they finished off 3 light cruisers and a light carrier and purchased a couple of fighters. So they're building up a decent Navy, nice looking fleet off of San Francisco. Now the thing the U.S. has to be concerned with, though, is because of the Japanese kind of sneak attack that they can launch, they haven't used it on the Western Allies yet, so they're kind of saving that for the U.S. So the U.S. doesn't want to necessarily combine all their naval assets into one sea zone and present that kind of inviting target for the Japanese, although it's currently out of range. So maybe as the Japanese maybe inch a little bit closer, the U.S. will probably disperse that fleet. Also, the U.S. went ahead and put down 2 heavy cruisers, and they moved their fleet carrier up one spot. So they're trying to balance out what Japan is doing in the Pacific. And then in China, I think we're going to be coming to a conclusion here, or at least an attempted one. The Communist Chinese now are bordering the last 2 national Chinese territories. So they've got 2 stacks of men on either side of Hunan there. And that's a total of about 20 infantry against maybe 10 or 15 national Chinese infantry. These infantry up here will be coming into Hunan from a direction that doesn't have mountains, so they won't suffer the mountain penalty. These ones here in the southern territory of Hunan will, but we'll see if the Communist Chinese try to end things. I mean, they've got a significant advantage. They have got so many more territories, so they're also usually hitting on their recruitment rolls each turn as well. So I think it's just a matter of time before the national Chinese end up getting taken out here. As far as the technologies go, again, things looking good for the Axis, although the Allies finally completed a couple tech. So Germany got advanced artillery and wartime economy. So now all 3 Axis powers, with having wartime economy, are rolling 2 6-sided die each turn and adding that to their income. So the Axis really outpacing the Allies right now in income. The Allies, at least the U.S., finished off jet fighters, and the British finished off improved factories. So that's where things look like for tech. We'll see what happens here coming up on turn 11, July 41.